In the days leading to Halloween, what could be spookier than spending time in a haunted house? How about a haunted code base with the sound of to-dos dragging their Jira backlogs down dusty hallways, parsers conducting demented operations on their pointers, let alone trying to safely test an execution path? So when you lock the door behind you, use a FIDO key. Which means this week we talk with Nuno, Loureiro, and Tiago Mendo from Probly about strategies to improve the efficiency and integration of scanning for your DevOps team. In the news segment, view source good, data exposure bad. IoT bad, Rickroll good. Using BinDiff to develop an exploit, using GitHub Actions to bypass reviews, using draft guidance from NIST, and more. Grab a flashlight and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Whether you need to manage bots, protect cloud applications at runtime, stop form jacking attacks, or secure your web applications and APIs, only Imperva offers a unified solution to protect from edge to application and data in one tool. Imperva helps you achieve more, save money, and become more efficient with fewer security vendors needed. Start a free trial today to easily protect your apps and website with Imperva. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Imperva. Contrast Security enables organizations to secure their applications from development to production. By embedding security sensors within software, Contrast automatically and continuously detects vulnerabilities in both custom and open source code while developers write code, providing them with context-specific how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast remediation. At the same time, by identifying only true vulnerabilities that pose risk and eliminating those that do not, Contrast empowers developers and security teams to prioritize and focus on only those vulnerabilities that matter. Learn how Contrast can help you secure your applications from development through production at securityweekly.com/contrast. Is your mobile app really secure? New vulnerabilities pop up every day, and malicious actors look for easy targets on app marketplaces to exploit. Securing your app's valuable IP and data is critical. GuardSquare's security solutions are built for developers and protect your app at every stage in the development lifecycle. Multiple layers of protection prevent reverse engineering and automatically detect tampering, making your app a difficult target for attackers. Learn more at securityweekly.com/GuardSquare.
This is episode 170, recorded October 18th, 2021. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Good morning, Mr. Shima. I was just thinking as we're doing the intro, it's we got a lot of awesome listeners that are week after week they put up with us and deal with our humor and hopefully get some education from us. So just saying hi to everyone out there and hope everyone's safe and thanks for listening.
Excellent message, and indeed, putting up with the thank you for saying humor, and because hopefully that's working. Other things that our listeners might be interested in are InfoSec World 2021, which is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on digital pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register now. And don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content, especially all the episodes that we have John on here. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, which you can chat with us right now, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms.
And just to stick my nose in there really quickly, we might be able to actually help out some of our listeners who don't want to listen to me by searching for those as well.
Let us know. Maybe we'll set up a poll, but we're going to keep John around for as long as we can because we also need him to have some conversations with our guests, two of which today are Nuno, who's a co-founder and CEO of Probly. In the past, he led an application security team at a telco provider where he provided training on secure coding, security guidance during the development lifecycle of projects, performed penetration testing, and implemented PCI DSS across the organization. He holds an MSc in information security from Carnegie Mellon. We also have have Tiago, who's CTO and co-founder of Probly. He has 17 plus years of experience in information security as a builder of web app security teams, a programmer, a pen tester, and a dad. He holds a master as well in information technology and information security from Carnegie Mellon University. Hello, Nuno, Tiago. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Michael. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us.
Well,
hi. Thanks for very good to be here again.
It is good to see you both again. Last time we spoke with you was back in June, and we were talking about web application scanning. And I think today we're possibly going to talk about web application scanning again, but maybe with a bit more focus on strategies. And I think strategies for scanning and strategies for, I think, any tool really, to bring it into a CI/CD pipeline so that it is fast and fast and efficient. And those might be synonyms, but we'll find out. Because part of the reason we're talking about this is that we want the DevOps teams to consume these tools, but we don't necessarily need the DevOps teams to be experts on security scanning, much like you all are on experts. So let's set things up a little bit and tell us, as you've been working as someone who's deploying scanning into these CI/CD pipelines, how have you seen some successful strategies or successful ways that you've brought a scanner into that DevOps teams are looking at the tools and saying, oh, thank you, we're actually getting value out of this, rather than we're getting a list of thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities that maybe somehow we're going to have to fix?
So I believe that it's in fact several things that can contribute to a successful scanning within the CI/CD pipeline. I believe that the main problem is that there is not really a standard way of doing things. Everyone does it in a different way, depending on the development processes, the number of environments that they have, the frequency that they update their environments, and so on. So, for instance, we have clients that release a new version, for instance, on the dev environment, like every day or every hour. And we have clients that, for instance, release a new version or deploy a new version like every week. So you have those that the number of deploys are really frequent or happening frequently, and those that it's not so frequent. And I believe that in order to be successful, like, for instance, the more you need to test or the more you need to deploy, the more you need to make sure that the scans are fast. So, for instance, if you are deploying frequently, like, for instance, daily or even several times a day, the scans that are performing need to be really fast, of course. And for that, you might need to use a mix of things. For instance, you can use, for instance, if you do it frequently, you can do some like partial scans or more incomplete scans that not cover the entire application, so that it's fast. And then in a later environment like staging or QA environment that is not updated so frequently, then you do a full scan and you test everything. So for me, I think it's very important to be able to accumulate your scenario on the way you do things. And I think I'll end my response here for now, and then we can continue discussing it. There's a lot more.
There is a lot more, and I think you started to go into some of that with the idea of those partial and incremental scans versus scanning everything, because one of the potential challenges of a web app scanner is it can take a long time to complete, because there's a lot to crawl, there's a lot of workflows, there's a lot of paths to follow down and make sure everything's tested. So being able to express to a scanner the idea that here is sort of the area of code that has changed, meaning this which possibly maps to maybe these few endpoints, the functionality or the logic behind them has changed, and we just want to scan these particular areas, or at least scan these first and foremost. These get the priority. That can be really helpful as a strategy to make a scan much quicker. And I think you were starting to tell us that. And I'm curious too. Then, how do we, as we start to think about configuring the scanners and coming up with this partial or incremental scan versus a complete scan, how much of this do you expose to the developers, to the end users, or what are the ways that you've seen these web apps be easier to scan? And here I'm kind of thinking of, basically, can you point to an endpoint, or are there certain types of endpoints that are easier to scan or easier to express, and there are other types of applications that, in fact, just become harder to test? And when I say harder to test, maybe that is not even just from a security perspective. It could be from their own functional or unit testing.
Yeah, there are applications that are easier to test. If you think about classic PHP applications that map requests URLs directly to files and provide us with a well-known local file inclusion, all those sorts of vulnerabilities. Those are really easy to scan, and you can easily say something like, okay, so my application was updated and it only affected /profile. So these changes only affect the profile of the user. So I want to scan just /profile. I have my target configured to the root of the site, but if I can start a partial scan just to /profile, this will be very beneficial to me because the scan will be much faster because it will be focused on a specific area of the site. So I'll get the results sooner, and that won't interfere in my development process. However, there's a lot of applications, that's a trend maybe in the last 10 years, that don't map URLs directly to files. They need to go through a routing phase, URL rewriting, routing, and those are harder to scan because you might be changing a file, and that file, I don't know, let's call it operations.something. It handles all the things in the site, depending on a specific parameter. So those might be harder to specify. It might require some more time for the developer to set up the target. Instead of saying /profile, it needs to say /profile query string with operation equals something. But that's something that really depends on the applications. But the good thing is that if they limit the scan to a small portion of the site, the scan will be faster. And it's important for the developer to get the results fast because its mindset will be on that. So if you develop something, start to scan, and you need to wait 12 hours for the scan result, in those 12 hours, you probably start working on something else. So your mindset is already in a different place. And if you need to come back to fix a vulnerability on the thing you were working before, that for sure will take you more time. You need to switch contexts again and going back and forth. So that's why partial scans, incremental scans are beneficial. So the speed, reduce the context switch, let the developer keep its workflow at his pace are all good things that come with partial scans.
I also imagine that it's got to be helpful for developers to be able to launch a scan on their own very quickly to test some of the changes they've made before they perhaps even merge it to the main branch. The idea being that they don't want to have to wait that 12 hours and then be surprised later on that, oops, there is a vuln, there's a problem, there's a bug of some sort. They want to be able to fix it themselves very quickly. So I'm kind of curious, as stepping back a little bit from just the mechanics of the scanning and sort of the strategy for how and when the scanning is deployed, what are some of the ways that you've seen that be done successfully? Meaning, just running by developers on their own, development applications, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it might be a blocking scan that it can't deploy to prod unless the scan comes back fully green or no vulns.
You can scan, for instance, locally in your own machine. Probably we have a feature which is the agent, where you can scan targets within internal networks, meaning you can also scan something running, a Docker running on your desktop. So that's one way for you to scan something you are developing locally and avoid waiting for the pipeline, a bigger scan to end. So imagine you can spin up a Docker container locally, like you probably do to do your own basic functionality testing, right? And if you can scan your own target at your own machine, it's really easy because you don't need to set up anything else. You don't need to deploy the container to a specific environment. You can just spin up our agent, which is a container, and say to scan something that is running on localhost some port. So that's one thing. That's one workaround for you to speed up testing by yourself and locally. Of course, there are challenges here. So most security tools are designed to scan a well-known address, like a specific and fixed address. And sometimes you have development environments or QA environments that the URL is constantly changing because they spin up a container that generates a random URL just for those tests. So there you might have a challenge there to be sure you are scanning the right place, and it keeps changing. So that can be done on the fly through the API. Scan these targets that I just got the URL a few seconds ago, or you can scan it in a later moment of the pipeline, maybe in the same environment where the functional tests, like the product tests, are already occurring.
That's interesting about the test environments, the URLs basically changing, because one of the other challenges that I've seen just in general for testing an application, just its functionality, its units testing, is the richness or the amount of data available within the dev or the staging environment, which tends to be not as much at scale. It tends to be not necessarily as complete or comprehensive, and which means it can make it a lot harder to test more complex workflows. So I'm kind of curious, how have you seen that just impact security scanning? The idea that maybe there aren't as many records in dev or staging environments, and what are some suggestions you might have there around how to either just be aware of such a problem or work through it?
So you actually mentioned a good point, like whether to scan in dev or in prod. We believe that it's actually best to scan in both. A lot of times, people desire that production environment is always the same, always has the same configuration, same code base as development environments, even though a lot of times it's not what it happens. It's not the truth. But other than that, you mentioned a good point. The amount of data that you have in a dev environment or in a production environment. For instance, in production, where you might have a lot of data, for instance, you might have like a listing of something, and that listing has pagination. So the fact that you have different pages to list something, then it triggers a new part of the application. And for instance, in dev, if you don't have enough data, you'll never trigger the pagination code. So basically, the scanner will not test any of that. So the difference in the data is definitely makes a difference. So if you can, it's good to have or try to anonymize the data from production and put in dev, or have at least the same quantity of data, or at least enough data for a scanner to be able to crawl all the sections of the site and to test all the sections of the site.
Yeah, and it's not only the amount of objects you have, it's the kind of objects, because only in production you will have that customer that has a unique configuration that you hammered down on the database or in the back office that was never reproduced in QA. So Only when you get to production, you are able to scan that particular feature or that user that has less fields filled. So all these cases are really hard to find in development environments unless there's a good discipline of doubling the data to QA, and it needs to be stripped out, anonymized, of course. But we barely see that. It's very uncommon to have development or staging pre-production environments with a good data, with a good volume of data.
Yeah, it's definitely been a rare sight for me as well. And I think, I agree and encourage the idea that the production application does need to be scanned. And if we're being honest, every IP address, every web application out there is being scanned to one degree or another by people running burp, zap, their own, curl commands or Python or what have you. So applications are being scanned, but if we're talking about using this type of scanning, doing this security testing of our own, we're looking for vulnerabilities. We want to find those. There's also can be a concern of, is this safe? Or how do I scan production in a way that isn't going to wreak havoc, cause some, unintended data deletion, things like that. So as we recommend scanning in production, what are some good ways of approaching that in ways that we can understand or what's the word I'm looking for? Just basically have good confidence that we're going to get some decent results, meaning some ideas that have we gotten a good coverage of our security testing, while also not just doing the equivalent of an RM-RF on all of our data.
Yes. So scanning production. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
It's usually like scanning production. It's usually a good idea to scan in production when you're using. So imagining you're scanning an app behind the login page. So it's a good advice to use a testing user to log in into your app, and for the scanner to log into your app and scan behind the login page. Of course, if you're scanning like an admin back office site, for instance, where you can add and delete users or add and delete posts, content from your site, and so on, then of course it's definitely not a good idea to run the scan in production, because the chances that the scanner or the crawler, as it finds new sections of the sites, will delete users or will delete posts from your site is very high. So scanning anything that can, like the account can have a more global impact on your site is not a good idea. Scanning with a user that only impacts the data of that user, that's a better idea. If you're still afraid that something might not go well or that something might go wrong, then we also offer, for instance, a scanning profile that we call safe, that is more suitable to scan production sites. And that scanning profile avoids some types of attacks, like some SQL injections based on timing attacks and tautologies. It does not make any post requests or puts or deletes or patch requests in order to avoid, being more intrusive on the site. So those are two things. So first, use a testing user that has testing data, and two, like if you're still concerned, you might want to try, for instance, a scanning profile that is more limited in terms of coverage, but at least you can still scan a lot of the production site. Of course, if you choose to use the safe scanning profile, then you should make sure that you're scanning the same code base in a dev environment as well, so that you have a complete scan. And the production is more like just to make sure everything is right.
And of course, having backups is critical, because you cannot prevent the attackers from scanning our web application, even if it's an application with a tight access control. there's always people that by mistake point a scanner or point a tool or I don't know are hacked and somehow scan and destroy the application. So hackers will not behave and will not stop. Oh, it's production. I'm not touching this.
Well, you mean I can't just edit my robots.txt file and all is good?
Yeah, you are good. They'll honor it.
John, I think you had something in there.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things there to think about is this comes back to sort of the backup point, and how do you, ongoing maintenance and security of a site. You can have a site which would be 100% secure, right? Like everything you've scanned it with, probably at like the hardest settings, everything is like no problem, and suddenly a bug is found or is created in one of the packages either you have internally or from one of your upstreams, and suddenly what was a perfectly secure site is now not. And then you run, you're used to running Probably or, not picking on your tool, any tool in a very aggressive manner. And what was perfectly fine last week is suddenly you've got, it's a very busy Monday morning. So those backups are quite important.
I'm sorry. A very busy Monday morning if you don't have backups, you aren't prepared. That's not a good situation to be in. And we're highlighting here is that we want to find those vulns, and those vulns can come in through subtle and unexpected ways, as you were pointing out, John. So maybe I want to switch to that aspect of talking about vulns or maybe metrics around it, because I'm also curious as we're using these tools, how are we, or how have you seen it being well used by AppSec teams and DevOps teams to talk about the vulnerabilities that they are finding, whether they are hopefully finding them before they reach prod, or of course they're running some scans identifying those in prod. But are they, are the metrics or the type of things they talk about, are they really just focusing on these are how many vulns we found? We found 10, 100, 1,000 because XSS was pervasive or something like that? Or what are some better conversations to have around those types of vulns once they're being found?
I mean, I think it's important to, measure the number of vulnerabilities over time and their criticality. So for instance, the number of highs and mediums and lows over time, and see your progress over time. It's also very important to measure the accuracy of those vulnerabilities, like if there are false positives, if there's something missing, and so on. And I think it's also very important to look at the fix ratio of those vulnerabilities and the amount of time that you take to fix a vulnerability per severity. So for instance, it's more acceptable that you take a month or 2 months to fix a low risk vulnerability, but for instance, for a high risk vulnerability, you should fix it as soon as possible. So like for instance, if you see 1 or 2 months on average to fix a high risk vulnerability, then like it should raise a red flag internally. So those are types of metrics that you should look into when you're doing scans and performing security testing on your apps.
As you see, companies, organizations have those discussions between DevOps teams and the AppSec team. We were talking just now about fixing the vulns. I just want to explore that a bit more. I'm kind of curious if you've been privy to these conversations, if you've been part of the kind of discussions that go around fixing it. How often do you see the recommendations being, we're going to switch to a different framework or do something much more fundamental to try to get rid of a class of vulnerabilities, such as, and here I'm thinking of switching to like a React front end to get rid of cross-site scripting or make it very, very difficult versus, well, this is the engineering budget we have, time, resources, etc., and we're just going to have to keep doing, throwing the equivalent of some duct tape over all of these particular vulns. I'm just kind of curious, have you seen those happen in really healthy, productive ways, or is that still kind of a point of friction and difficulty to get through often for teams?
We don't really have visibility of how our clients fix their issues. From what we can see, because of the when a vulnerability is retested and then fixed, A lot of times we see that it's most likely it was like just manually fixed the part of the code that was vulnerable. So it was basically the developer just went to the code and fixed the vulnerability. On frameworks, when they're using frameworks and it's a vulnerability on a framework, it's very normal for them to update the version of the framework. Sometimes they probably just like patch that specific vulnerability and that's it. But we don't really have visibility on how the clients fix those issues. I don't know if you, Tiago, if you have any more insights on this.
No, what we see is that normally customers fix the high-risk vulnerabilities first, especially SQL injections and all those that can compromise the whole server at once. But all the others, they don't fix them as fast. And they give a lower priority to them. So what we notice is high-risk vulnerabilities, very high risk getting fixed. All the others, it's something that it varies a lot, and the time to fix it might be huge depending on the company.
Yeah, and I guess we're not going to be successful if we just turn everything into a high-risk vulnerability to trick people into fixing that, because then I think suddenly nothing will get fixed, right?
Right. Yeah, and developers, despite not being pen testers, they still, most of them, they recognize the impact of the vulnerability. They can see the difference between the SQL injection and a cookie missing the secure flag.
Yes, I think that's a great way to express what developers see, because as you've been describing this whole time, the developers know their application, they care about the application, they want basically some feedback about, is it secure or not? And one of the things I did sort of introduce this segment talking about DevOps team or DevSecOps team. We haven't really defined what that is or what it looks like. And I don't necessarily know that we need to have a really solid definition of that. But I am curious, just as you actually have seen different teams worked with different customers, what are some of the trends that you have seen that you think are positive? The ways that what we call a DevOps team or DevOps trends. What are some of those positive trends that you've seen orgs pick up that you would hope that even more also adopt?
Yeah, the most common pattern we see is to have periodical scans scheduled or triggered on demand by some build or some branch, and have the application scanned frequently, maybe daily or on a weekly basis for the development environment, developer/test environment, and then in parallel. Also a frequent scan for the production environment. This way you can detect vulnerabilities that will only affect the production version, like specific configurations of some reverse proxy, I don't know, some Nginx that is missing some critical headers, or it has some backend that has application errors enabled. So that's a pattern for sure. Another thing we see is developers, teams having notifications enabled, for instance, through webhooks or through a Slack integration, or directly through Provi's API, get notifications in their Slack or in their CMs when vulnerabilities are found, at least the high-risk vulnerabilities. So they can act immediately and they don't need to wait for the test to end and for the developer to check. So having that integration is a step further, because you get to detect the vulnerabilities sooner in the pipeline.
I think there's other clients as well that because they're not doing the partial scans and so on, and the scans can take some time. So what they do is, for instance, they have a staging environment, and they run like a CI/CD pipeline on staging like every night at a certain hour. So basically they have like nightly builds of their staging environment, and they do all the tests, they perform all the tests, including they trigger a scan. So basically, like in the morning when they go back to work, they already have the output of all the tests, including the scan itself. So that's I think an easy way to mitigate the fact that scans take a bit longer, and like if you release frequently throughout the day, you might not be able to perform a scan every time you deploy a new version. I don't know, Mike, I don't know if you're still going back to the scan time in CI/CDs, if you're planning to.
That's always some of it, and I think I like the last point you were making there too about just adapting to taking advantage of automation, because as it implies, we could run it whenever and however much we want and have it accommodate our normal work schedules, right? So the tools are accommodating us rather than we're accommodating ourselves to the tools. And what you just described was at least one good example of doing that.
Yeah, well, like if you need to perform scans more frequently and you need them to be fast, I also have some tips on what can be done in order to improve the scan time. So for instance, let's start with the basics. So we already talked about the partial scans and incremental scans. So basically to have the ability when you're starting a scan to define the path, the route that you wanna test that time. Of course, that has the challenge that Tiago mentioned. Basically, you need to map URLs with files. So basically, when a file is changed, you know which URL represents or is represented by that file, so that you can include it in the scope of that partial scan. Another thing is to do some sort of threat modeling, like wizard when you're adding a new application to be scanned, where you can set, for instance, if it's using a database or not, if so, which database, what's the operating system, and so on, because that can automatically turn off a lot of the tests, so making the scan faster, of course. One other thing that can be also interesting is, so for instance, we provide a feature to record sequences. That's more useful, for instance, if you have like a more complex workflow on your app and you want to scan that specific workflow, so that basically you can just record the sequence, provide it to Probably, and then Probably will record that sequence. One interesting thing that we are going to release very soon is the ability to only scan sequences. So for instance, if you think that mapping files to routes to URLs might be a challenge and difficult, one option that you have is just to record the sequence that you wanna test, and then just provide that sequence to the scanner and tell the scanner just scan the sequence and nothing else.
No, yeah, that sounds like some cool work. Especially we can bring the scanner around to those business workflows. These are the sequence of events rather than sort of a random walk, if you will, through the links. And with that, it's great to see what you all are working towards. And I'm glad you also took time to record this interview with us this morning, and fill us in on DevOps and the DevOps team strategies for application scanning.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
I want to say thanks once again to Nuno and Tiago. Thanks, of course, to John as well, and everyone hanging out in our Discord. If you'd like to learn more about Probably, visit securityweekly.com/Probably. And we're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.